G'day, hi and welcome. I'm getting quite grizzly looking. All right. I didn't think that far ahead. I'll see if we can put my camera up on this. All right. I'm gonna try a medium long video on this. We'll see how far we get. Uh, but first, check out my hat. All right. Okay. So, as you guys know, Ozzy Osbourne is no longer with us. 76 years old, and he had Parkinson's, and plus, I guess all the abuse from drugs. And that is a fate of people that do hard drugs. Parkinson's and stuff like that tend to happen to people like that. Anything that, messes with your brain chemistry, you know what I mean? It tends to have long lasting effects. So God rest him. He's no longer with us. Never met the man. Unfortunately, never got to see him live. But looking at how the world is viewing the whole loss of Ozzy Osbourne, and I started thinking about something that just like, wow, it makes sense why think of all the actors and actresses that have died. There's only a few that really come to mind that like the whole world kind of weeps when they go, like Elvis or somebody like that, you know what I mean? And like my mom's generation, god rest her, it was Elvis, right? So when Elvis died, like everybody, like the whole world was kind of in mourning because he was such an iconic figure and such a superstar for his time. Whether and I know there's some people might not even know who Elvis is now, but most people do, even still so many years after, right? His passing. Well, Ozzy, okay, he transcends many generations. So, for example, Black Sabbath is basically, the birth of heavy metal between. Have you ever seen an excellent documentary called Journey of a Headbanger? There's part one and part two. Part one is basically the origins of heavy metal. And they traced it to basically Led Zeppelin as one side of like heading, eventually heading to like, glam metal and all that stuff, and the more commercial metal, and Black Sabbath, eventually going into like black metal and stuff like that. And it was really, really cool. And I think it was well documented enough that it's like when you look at like it was, yeah, okay, there's a bit of a pseudoscience, like, the chicken and egg. Was this band, did they really have more of an influence than that band? But we can all agree that Black Sabbath was probably the first heavy metal band. You know, that put it on the map. I'm sure there'd be some guys saying, "No, well, there was this obscure, band that had like 8 fans that was heavier than them at the time." But no, what I'm talking about is the influence of Black Sabbath. I've played many Black Sabbath songs live, and I'm a Gen Xer. So the Boomers started with the Black Sabbath, and basically their introduction of Ozzy Osbourne. So that's the first generation. Okay, that's influenced by them. Then my generation comes along, and by the time we're listening to that kind of music, we're into the 1980s, late 70s, early 1980s. For Gen Xer, and they're starting, like I was listening to Jimi Hendrix when I was a kid, but Jimi Hendrix was already dead by the time I started listening to him. Kiss was there when I was a kid, but Kiss was still way after Black Sabbath, right? So the Boomers really didn't get into Kiss. Gen X, late Boomers did, but Black Sabbath. I mean, the Boomers were, the 20-year-olds listening to Black Sabbath when, Ozzy and Tony Iommi were, and Bill Ward and Geezer Butler were in their 20s. You know what I mean? So they were the Boomers, right? So that's generation one. But then we get like Ozzy Osbourne. I call it his kind of, don't take this the wrong way, but kind of like his fat lesbian phase in the early 80s where he was kind of sort of glam, sort of not. He had this kind of really weird look to him. And whatever. But I was into Black Sabbath. I was into Ozzy. I loved Ozzy. Bark at the Moon was awesome. All that stuff. But around 1988, I really started to get into Ozzy Osbourne. And what really hooked me on it was, I don't know if it was my sister bought it for me or my mom and dad or myself, but basically the Randy Rhoads tribute, the most iconic. I had that poster up, like 5 versions of that poster on my wall of Ozzy holding Randy Rhoads up with that iconic flying polka dotted flying V. That I think just is such an iconic photo. You know what I mean? And by this time, Randy Rhoads was already dead, and I was a fan of Quiet Riot and stuff like that. And then I wasn't really aware of who Randy Rhoads was until I listened to the Randy Rhoads tribute, and I was so blown away by that live album. I became like the biggest Ozzy fan at that point. And now you got Generation X. That's 2 generations right there, sucked into it, right? Ozzy's there for the boomers. He's there for the Gen X guys, right? And then I call what I call the cool Ozzy phase, where I thought Ozzy just looked the most iconic, was in the early 90s. It just the man in black kind of look. You know what I mean? The preacher Ozzy. That was my favorite Ozzy look. I just thought, the No More Tears album, I believe it was called. The one with Mama, I'm Coming Home and No Road to Nowhere and all that. But getting back to the Randy Rhoads tribute thing, I listened to that so much, I wore that cassette out 3 times. That's how much I listened to it as a teenager. I was just it, and there was so much resonance in a lot of what Ozzy was singing about. And in hindsight, like starting to listen to him again after his passing, because I haven't listened to him in years. I'm like, man, he was really singing about some really genuine stuff. Like he was singing about stuff that, was really about his experience, his life. And so many people related to it. Like some of the lyrics are abstract. Some of it, yeah, okay, he was Satanism. He was the Prince of Darkness. Like right now we got a weird thing where the Christians are trying to claim him, say, no, Ozzy's definitely up there in heaven. The evangelicals are like, no, he's burning in hell because he was a Satanist. The atheists are, no, he was ours because he called out Jimmy Swaggart. And, everybody else, no, he was just a dude that liked to party. He's our guy. Everybody's trying to claim Ozzy. But here's the kicker. Ozzy is for everybody. Because, and you won't notice it until you notice it, but when you start going back, especially in what I call the Ozzy cool era, where you look at it, the symbolism, okay? Right from Black Sabbath on, the first thing when you think, well, Black Sabbath itself, okay, the Sabbath, right? There's a religious connotation to it. What was he singing about with Mr. Crowley? He was singing about Aleister Crowley. But when you really listen to the lyrics, what's he singing about? He's basically singing, Mr. Crowley, was it worth it now that you're burning in hell? And then I started listening to, okay, Miracle Man. I remember the first time I heard Miracle Man, this was, Zakk Wylde was now the new guitar player replacing Randy Rhoads. And I'm like, nobody can replace Randy. But I was blown away by Zakk Wylde at the time. I was like, this guy's good. This guy's really good. And that solo for Miracle Man, Crazy Babies, and of course, No More Tears, all that stuff, just fantastic. But I think my favorite Randy Rhoads guitar solo is from Children of the Grave live. It floats. It's so good. It's so good. I was listening to it the other night. I was just like, I love Tony Iommi. Like the cool factor of Tony Iommi is iconic, right? But what about Tony Iommi? dangling in crosses. Crosses on his SGs, right? Sometimes right side up, sometimes upside down, right? Okay, Ozzy said it, like, yeah, we pandered to it, whatever. But then you start listening to the lyrics of Miracle Man. I'm looking for a miracle man, one not in the skies. I don't know where he come from. I don't know where he've been. Self-righteous, whatever, something sin, right? Uh, yeah, but I'm looking for a miracle man who will tell me no lies. He's singing it in a church. There's crosses all over. Ozzy, this is going to blow your mind. And again, I'm a Christian friendly person. I'm not a Bible thumper. In fact, I'm a very lot like Ozzy, where I believe, but I'm not at church all the time. You know what I mean? What Ozzy was doing was he was basically preaching. he was telling you this man was a false. He was false. But why would he tell you that? Why would he sing a song about a man that was basically, is it just about the hypocrisy of evangelicals? No. He was saying, no, we are looking for somebody who is genuine. We are looking for somebody who's not going to lie to us, that is going to preach the gospel. That's what Ozzy was doing. It's just you don't catch it until after he passes and you actually pay attention to it. And then pretty much everywhere you look, there's angelical symbolism everywhere. But there's the light and the dark, and I think Ozzy battled with that, obviously, because of some of the stuff he battled with. But I also thought Ozzy Osbourne had like the brutality, honesty of like a 5-year-old child. You know what I mean? Like he just was so, and that's what made him so freaking comical and likable. Was just that when somebody would say something, like if you ever watch the Pat interview, it's like you're gonna piss yourself laughing because it's just the brute honesty, the intensity of his honesty. It was like, somebody he goes, well, I was playing live somewhere and somebody threw a bat up on stage and I grabbed it. And I thought it was a toy bat and I bit the head off of it. And the reporter goes, was it alive? Well, no, now I bit the head off of him. Kind of like, you stupid. I just killed him. But it was just the way he delivers it. And it's so, like I say, it's the brute honesty of a 5-year-old child, right? So, flawed man, sure, granted. But I think a man that had influence in a very positive light. Suicide Solution. That song probably brought a lot of people out of a lot of dark places. That's what he wrote it about, because that's where he was at one point. So when you start thinking about Ozzy's lyrics, not for every song, but for a lot of songs, a lot of it was just about his life experience. Road to Nowhere is about just the ups and downs the man had, Mama, I'm Coming Home. Everybody's reviewing that song now and bawling their eyes out, right? It's a beautiful song. I used to play it live. I used to love doing that guitar solo too. But the thing is that everybody can relate to it, right? What the song was about was he had visited his mother after years of excommunication because, he was the devil's child with all that stuff. And, it was kind of, I guess, for him, a bit of closure, right? And how do you feel about that? Well, the song tells you, So a lot of people can relate to that, right? And not necessarily in a positive or negative way, but just in a, everybody misses their mom. I miss my mom, So for Ozzy, he's putting out stuff like this, and like every song has some sort. Okay, maybe Bark at the Moon doesn't really have a cryptic message to it. Very cool video, but Bark at the Moon is kind of like like when he was wrestling with drug addiction. Basically that's, I remember he said in an interview years ago. I remember him talking. He goes, yeah, basically it's like you're this great person trying to slay your demons, and all of a sudden you become this fucking werewolf thing demon when you're on the drugs, right? That's why I don't do drugs, kids, he was a family man. He really, a lot of these older rockers are really family men in the most extraordinary way. When you really strip it all away, it's like they're anything their family needs and whatever. Dysfunctional family, maybe. I think whatever, but they're together. That's what's important. So now you got Gen X and the Boomers, right? So after Ozzy's cool phase in the '90s, I stopped listening to Ozzy. Not because I didn't like him or like I was just kind of like after the Perry Mason thing, I just kind of lost interest in him, right? But the No More Tears and everything between Bark at the Moon and what do you call it? Diary of a Madman. Like I have all those tapes somewhere, and then of course the Randy Rhoads tribute. Uh, uh, I had a really cool Aussie tribute tape cassette called Native in Black. I still have the cover, but I can't find the damn tape. And it was everybody doing like covers of whatever. But War Pigs. Like just listen to War Pigs now. Like every generation can relate to War Pigs. And I mean, Killer Giants, like these are the two probably best anti-war songs ever written, you know? And you think about that. Okay, if this guy was so evil and so bad, he did sing on the edge. He did, but I think there's a lot of proselytizing and like Ozzy kind of, putting out the prophetic warning. Everywhere you see him, he's got a cross, So I think a lot of people, and if you look at the memes popping out, right? And these memes aren't coming from Gen X. These memes aren't coming from, what do you call it? The boomers. They're coming from the millennials, like millennials and Gen Z. 4 generations. This man has affected 4 generations. Elvis affected maybe 3. Think about that. 4 generations. And then we wonder why everybody's trying to claim him, because he's had that much influence. Wait, but there's a new generation, Gen Alpha. Yeah, my nephew's going to be 12 in about a month or so. I say he's 12 now. For my longtime subscribers, yes, my nephew is 12, or about to be 12. So, he's 11 and 9 months. 11 and 11 months. Okay, say he's 12. Yes, I am 52. I'm not having a senior moment yet. Bloody hell. Sharon! You know what I mean? Yeah, how old am I? There you go, yeah. But like I didn't watch the funeral stuff, and I didn't watch his last thing. And I know some people, we'll leave Sharon out of this one. I know some people have lots to say about that, so I'll just leave that. But that's not what I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the memes. Almost every meme I see, my favorite one I saw so far, and some people have even animated these memes, is Ozzy with a dove in his hand about to bite the head off, and Jesus going, like, no, Ozzy, don't do it, and then they both laugh at it in the meme because it's like AI, right? Ozzy meeting Randy Rhoads again in heaven. Dio pulling Ozzy up from, up through the clouds into heaven. Like Dio, you know what I mean? Now, the devil horns thing with Dio, that was from his superstitious Italian grandmother. And it was the Italian evil eye. So whenever you did something bad, she'd give you the devil horns. And that's what Dio was doing, was the devil horns from his Mima. Like, who knew, right? Like little Italian lady, she started that, you know what I mean? Like yeah, it was the devil horns, right? But the thing is there's so much to say about how much unification came under the music of Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath, but anywhere Ozzy went, the influence he would have. The up years, the bad years, the good years, bad years, whatever. Aside, the overall is people who have never met the man are in tears about it. And that says something about a legacy. Like, I mean, this man is we didn't realize how big he is, but then watch him live. I've been watching some of the live stuff. The man is just a hoot. Like yeah, like he's been moving like a geriatric for about 50 years now. Like he was moving like that when he was in his 20s because he was so bashed by drugs. He was all screwed up, right? But look at how he gets the audience going. Like the smile, the charm of it. He's a, he came off as such a genuine person. Even the people that had falling outs with him, say like Jakey Lee and stuff like that. One of the guitar players, and yeah, okay, Ozzy did him kind of dirty on how he fired him and stuff like that. But that's the music business, whatever. But they were still friends at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like they did bury the hatchet at some point. Maybe not to the degree. Yeah, I'm sure there's still some bitterness there or whatever. But it always seemed like it worked itself out between Ozzy's relations with band members or whatever, and stuff like. Because I think that's just the type of person he was. Where I don't. He doesn't appear to be the type of person that held a really nasty grudge for a long time. Although, Bark at the Moon, right? When he was on his drugs, you heard this about every rock star that was on drugs. When they were on the drugs, they were horrible. This is pretty much every person. When they're on drugs, they're horrible. When they're off the drugs, they're the nicest person you ever meet. Jekyll and Hyde, Bark at the Moon. There you go. You know, um, the thing about Ozzy too was his musical genius was in melody. He would come up with the melody, then sing, and then he would just leave the band to work out the details of how the song would come out. Apparently, he's like one of those guys that if you worked for him, he gave you a lot of leeway. Like you just do your thing. Like I just want a good song out of it. But he was very, very particular how the song would come out. So but to get the idea going, like he'd let the ideas flow. You know what I mean? So that's pretty cool. So if he captures Gen Alpha, which I think he will, there'll be a lot of. I think Gen Alpha, when they get a little bit bigger, they're going to be listening to Ozzy's legacy and whatever generation comes after that. So Ozzy might be one of those really rare gems of a musician that becomes kind of timeless, where he captured the boomers, he captured Gen X, he captured the millennials, he captured Gen Z a bit, and now 5 generations of people. You know what I mean? Like Elvis, I love Elvis, but Elvis can't do that. Ozzy could. How? Where was he sitting to be in the right place at the right time to be able to put that kind of music out to have people uh, like relate like that. Well, I'm going to start with Gen Z. We can't really critique the Gen Alpha yet because they're too young. They're still little kids, and they've probably heard Ozzy, but they're probably not into music like Gen X was probably the generation that was so into music. You know what I mean? Like so many different genres. Like the Boomers, they had genres, different genres, but they didn't have like what we have now. Like there's like every different song is considered a different genre in metal, right? Um, and then you factor in all other genres like country and rock and rap and hip hop and blues and bluegrass. The list goes classical. List goes on and on and on, right? But we'll start with Gen Z. Okay, so Gen Z, they're probably what I'm getting from the reactions is that the brilliance of his lyrics hit them hard because, like, oh my god, this guy was just so good at what he did and at reaching the message, through melody. And you'd say, well, Ozzy wasn't that melodic. I beg to differ. Ozzy was super melodic, very melodic in his music. Uh, that's why everything, it's just he had a strange way of delivering it because he would deliver the melody in a screaming, yelling voice that sounded pretty good, but it would carry. Example. Ah, like that, right? Maybe I'm a little bit low, but you get the idea. Oh, and you know what I mean. There's a melody there, right? It's not just straight across the board. Yeah, I don't know. That's a melody. What? Don't ask me. I don't know. You know what I mean? There's a melody. Not don't ask me. I don't know. You know what I mean? That's what was catch. That's their hook. That's what's catching people. As a musician, I pick stuff out like that. That's why I love symphonic metal so much because it's classical music, classical opera with distortion. you know, but it's melody. It's all melody. So Ozzy was always melody. And another thing that was really cool about that is that melody hooks you in, and then just the craziness of the persona of Ozzy Osbourne. Like if you look at him in his cool years, yeah, he looks like a raging lunatic, right? But he's really good at it, right? Because it kind of was, you know, like he was like the estranged uncle, you know what I mean? Like just kind of out there, right? So seems to be affecting Gen Z from the lyrical content and stuff like that, and then just the likable character of Ozzy. Maybe you met him personally and he was the biggest asshole to you, whatever. But in general, most people agree is chaos. Like the man would keep a smile on your face just because of the chaos around him, right? Like just the craziest shit going on. Like this guy's just such a mental case, but he's the funniest mental case you'll be around, right? Um, a likable person. Like I say, like the charm of a 2-year-old. You know what I mean? Like the brutality, honesty of a 2-year-old, but charming. You know. And the thing is that seems to be hitting them emotionally because, well, Gen Z is a very emotional. I'm not taking a shot at them here, jabbing that, but they are a very emotional generation because there's a lot of shit going on in the world. They have a lot of instability in their lives, and they're going to relate to a guy that had a lot of instability in his life. So let's back up one to the millennials. Well, the millennials are a lot better off than Gen Z in the sense of mental health and stuff like that. But they grew up in a bit of a bubble wrapped society, right? So the rebelliousness of Ozzy is probably going to, be a little bit more, hey, this is cool, man, and relate to that. So again, the man's career spanning so long from the '60s. Like when you think about that, he's had a 60 some odd year career in music. Okay, now there's something else I thought of. When we get to the boomers, I'm gonna mention it, and it's gonna put things into perspective. Like you're gonna be like, oh my god, that it's gonna be a ton of bricks on you. You're gonna be like, oh my god, I never thought of that. So, so the millennials, like the Gen Z, there's probably a lot of stuff that they're relating with Ozzy, and just seeing like the character and all that, and then listening to the music and the good music, and it's like, oh my god, that like the '90s, the '80s and the '90s were so cool, because the like us Gen Xers, the '80s was kind of our adolescence, right? And to the early '90s, in the '90s we were becoming young adults. But for the millennials, their adolescence is in the '90s, right? 80s and '90s being kind of like the golden era for humanity, on the human happiness index and prosperity index. The three best times recorded in history to be alive was in number three spot was the 1920s, but we saw what followed that. And then the second spot is the 1990s, and the third spot is the first spot is the 1980s. So 1980s is as good as we've ever had it as human beings in overall for happiness, creativity, prosperity, blah blah blah. And we've been kind of on decline really heavily since 2008. You guys kind of know why. And if you don't, well, just look at what was going on in 2008 and you'll understand why everything's so expensive now. We're just living through the death rolls of the 2008 collapse. But I won't get into that. So yeah, so the millennials and the Gen Z have a lot of similarities. Where I think Gen Z is just their, the emotionalness of the lyrics hitting them, and the relation of stuff like that with the rebellion of the millennials. Not ever really rebelling. Like the millennials weren't the rebellious group, right? That was Gen X. We were the rebellious ones. And right now, the two rebellious groups are typically the number one rebellious group now is Gen Z, and the number two is now Gen X, right? Then we're going to pull back to Gen X. Okay, Gen X, I think why you're seeing so many Gen Xers, uh, being hit so hard by Ozzy's passing is for a couple of things. Because Ozzy was there before I was born, you know what I mean? And I grew up knowing about him, pretty much from a kid on, and then listening to his music as a teenager, really right in his heyday. It hits right in the Gen X zone, right between the teenager and the adult of Gen X. That's Ozzy's sweet spot, right? That's where he's put out the most of his music, right? Whether you like the music, it's like, oh, the older stuff was better, blah blah. But it's right there between the '80s and the '90s. It's hitting Gen X, sucking us in good, and we love it, right? But it's hitting Gen X in a different way because, yeah, the music, we love the music for the rebellion of it. We loved it for its lyrical content. We loved it for the melody. We loved it just because it was just fun to headbang to, all that. But what's hitting Gen X is not that stuff. Not like Gen Z and the millennials. It's not hitting them the same. What's hitting Gen X is he was there before we were born, and now he's gone. Everything comes to an end. So basically, it's a check on mortality for us. When a generation starts to see its icons die off and disappear, what happens is it's like, shit, I'm getting old. How long do I have? That type of thing. Which I think that's probably the heaviest part for Gen X is that, like it's something that Ozzy became a part of the furniture. Like he was going to be there forever, right? And now he's gone. You know what I mean? Like that, it's like, it means I'm no longer young. It means, maybe they don't know that that's the way they're looking at it, but that's the first thing I like. Okay, now we'll go into the boomers. Well, the boomers, they're like, oh my God, I'm the same age as Ozzy. I'm older than Ozzy. How much time do I have left? So this is how it's hitting the boomers and us Gen Xers. But here's the ton of bricks that's going to come on to you. Okay, what happens when, and I can't believe I'm going to say it. I don't even want to say this because, Murphy hears things and I don't want people mad at me that I jinxed it. When Keith Richards dies, Keith Richards goes 6 generations. He goes back to the basically to the silent generation. Yeah, so like once the Rolling Stone, like Ron Woods, yeah, he was gone, but he wasn't iconic like in the sense of known like Keith Richards. Like Keith Richards, there's a million memes about him being around when the dinosaurs were created, type of thing. Uh, so Mick Jagger and like that. So the rest of the band not the same weight as the whatever. Angus Young, same thing. Like that's going to hit a couple of generations pretty hard. But I don't think AC/DC is going to hit the millennials and Gen Z the same way Ozzy did. And I don't think the Rolling Stones are going to hit Gen Z and the millennials the same way Ozzy did for whatever reason. And it's not because I'm saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying it didn't quite. The Rolling Stones weren't quite like 1990s Ozzy's music can still be music you would hear kind of produced today. But the Rolling Stones music is still stuck back there, maybe up to about 1980. You know what I mean? So new Rolling Stones music is still 1980. So the younger generation, they might like it, they might not, but the younger generation likes stuff that sounds even modern, for even if it's old, it's like it still sounds modern. And that's something that Ozzy has, right, over the other guys. It's a critique. Maybe you'll agree, maybe you disagree, but it's the way I see it. And I'm like, yeah, this is the, like, okay, yeah, we lost Hulk Hogan as well. There's a lot of child icon thing, but not everybody was into wrestling. Most of Gen X was, but I think Hulk Hogan probably affected Gen X more than anybody else because, you know what I mean. So Hulk Hogan didn't have the influence of Ozzy Osbourne, right? And capturing the generations like that. So I'm gonna kind of like let you guys stew on this, especially those of you over the age of 45, and those of you who are younger than 45. It'd be interesting to hear what you guys think about this. I'm a 52-year-old man. I'm basically 24 years younger than what Ozzy was when he passed. 24 years. When you're 52, you'll notice this when you hit about 45, is where did the year go? It's like every year, time, as the saying says, as you get older, time speeds up. So I'm going to leave that part of it there, okay? And you guys can reminisce about Ozzy all you like in the comments, whatever, what you liked about him, what you didn't like about him, how he affected you. Uh, Most of the things you could probably hear from people is how Ozzy got you through a dark time, because you could relate. And I don't think there's an Ozzy fan out there, like a true Ozzy fan. And what I mean by true Ozzy fan, that you listen to a whole album a few times and you got something out of it. Because it was almost impossible to listen to anything Ozzy did and not get something out of it, right from Black Sabbath to now. And I forget what they were called before Black Sabbath, but they didn't go on they really didn't get on the map until they became Black Sabbath. They were called something else before that. So I mean, think about that. But I'm gonna leave this as kind of like a part one. So God rest Ozzy Osbourne. I believe the man is in heaven. Um, I think one of the things that happens, like we're all on the same bus at some point, right? And when you get a mortality check, the younger generations don't get the mortality check the same way. Like, for example, when Kurt Cobain died, that was, under the millennial watch a bit more, you know what I mean? And us Gen Xers were, starting to get a bit older, but, that affected them. But that's a young guy dying when everybody was young, because when everybody's young, they're going to die young and live forever. Jimi Hendrix died 27, Janis Joplin 27, Jim Morrison 27. Yeah, they all died at 27. Right, but they died young, right? Which is tragic. They died young, so they didn't have legacy. You know what I mean? Like in the sense of Ozzy having legacy, more than just his music. It was like, it's not like you're listening to somebody like growing up and the person was no longer around. Like for Gen X, Ozzy was still around when I was listening to him. For millennials, Ozzy was still around when whatever era you were listening to. Maybe you were just a Black Sabbath fan, but Ozzy was still alive today when you got up in the morning and had your breakfast. You were Gen Z. Ozzy was alive 2 weeks ago. When you got up for your breakfast, whether you were listening to Ozzy solo career, Ozzy Black Sabbath, whatever it was, Ozzy side projects, Lita Ford. Beautiful song, Close My Eyes Forever. I know all the people that work with everybody did an Ozzy tribute by now. Like the Ozzy tributes, I think are going to be going on for the next 5 years. I'm going to be doing a bunch myself. You know what I mean? Just because it's not that I feel that I owe somebody anything or anything like that. It's just I want to be a part of it because I think it was a part of a beautiful thing. Like I was saying, we're all going to be on the same bus at some point, right? And how you get on that bus. For me, am I going to die gracefully in my sleep? Probably not. I'm going to die either with a chainsaw in my hand, let that gory one sink in, getting knocked off my bicycle by a tractor trailer on my way to work on, taking a rural, cycling on a rural highway, or dying in one of these death trap cars that I keep buying. The brakes are going to go out again. The hood's going to fly open. The door flies open, sucks me out for the final time. I don't know. Like, these things happen to me, right? So when it's your time, it's your time. So you could spend a lot of time worrying about your mortality. And when you, like I say, hit over 45, like me, my mortality check was at 46 years old. Why? Because that was 46 or 48 when I got I've had two mortality checks. The first one was in 2019, however old I was in 2019. 7 years ago? 45. Yeah, so 45, I get my mortality check by day, 2x10s, 16 feet long, 3 of them stacked on my shoulder, building houses, right? Next morning I get up, I felt like somebody shot me. Dad had to rush me to the hospital. Doctor said my appendix was that fucking big. He's like, he goes, I don't know how it didn't burst. He goes, it's the biggest one I've ever saw. He goes, you must have been in so much pain. I was like, dude, I said, and I've never been the same since. I'm about half the strength. I'm still a pretty strong guy. I work labor, but I probably had hours to live. Who knew, right? And between there and now, my trucks have nearly killed me going off the road with the engine dying and the power steering locking up, going over cliffs, stuff like that, that close to death, like so many times, right? Just don't even think about it. It's like it's going to happen when it's going to happen, right? And that's the way I view it. But a lot of people really hyper sensationalize on that, especially a lot of my friends. It was at 27 because all the greats died at 27 and they feared getting older. And I never feared that. I don't think Ozzy feared getting older. I don't think he was quite aware. He was just kind of off in his own world, it seems. Like, I don't think he really cared because he was surrounded by so much family and stuff like that. You wouldn't be focusing on yourself anyway. You know what I mean? And that's I think something that people probably picked up from Ozzy, from the family man side. Again, dysfunctional family, sure. But he stuck to what was important, right? Again, I know he's a flawed man. He had, two wives, he got divorced or whatever. But, if you listen to all of his kids, he always went to bat for his kids. You know what I mean? And that you can't fault the man for, as squirrely as he may have been. So the thing is that, yeah, there's a bit of a darkness for some people looking at it as it's a bygone era, and that what for us older guys, how long do we have, right? Well, I saw another guy on a cyclist video talking about this the other day. I guess he's about 10 years older than me or whatever, talking about, I'm old enough to be at this old age home. I'm old enough to do this. How long will I be able to go cycling for and stuff like that? Is cancer going to get me? Is this going to get me? That? And he's like, don't waste your time worrying about it because it's going to happen whenever it's going to happen. And I think that is the lesson that Ozzy can teach us is, okay, if you were to look at the week before you died, okay, what would you have done that week? Like, what would you typically have done that week? Watch TV, done something, or would you fucking sat in a chair and sung your last fucking concert? You know what I mean? Like, could you go out in a better way? I don't think so. I didn't watch that, but apparently it was quite emotional for a lot of people because they knew, like, this is probably the last time we're ever going to see this guy alive. And when you get a little bit older, and it starts around your 40s, where everybody around you just starts dropping like flies, and it's just like you go look at photos, and you're just like, there's some people when you see them, you're happy to see them and you spend quality time with a little bit of quality time because you know that this is probably going to be one of the last times I see this relative again or whatever. They're up there, you know what I mean? And I've always tried to look at it as, Let sleeping dogs lie if you can. Don't live in the past if you can. Bury the hatchet as soon as you can, if you can. I'm fortunate one of those people that I live kind of like in an extended family kind of situation. Like every one of my relatives live, not everyone, I got too many relatives, but not too many is too many, but like too many relatives in like the area living around me. No, well, I don't mean it. There's no way to word this properly, but everybody around me is basically aunt and uncle, cousin, aunt and uncle, brother, cousin, aunt. Uncle's no longer with us. And it's thinning out on my hill. Like everybody around, so it's kind of like an extended family for me. So I understand the importance of family. You know what I mean? And that is what's important. The rest of the stuff is kind of trivial, right? Relationships are what's the most important, and that's something that Gen Z has unfortunately been kind of deprived of. Is that human connection. Gen X, I think we got it right, because almost everything we did was a social get together. Even the loners hung out in packs of 40. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's one of those things that everywhere you go, try to make your dealings with people as positive as possible. Try to, don't focus so much on yourself. Yeah, take care of yourself, do what you got to do. I get that. But don't dwell on the just me thing. Like, go and, pay it forward a bit. Give people something to remember you by, if you can, but good. And you can do a lot of things to make people remember you. You remember that asshole that was in the video and he was shaking his fist and yelling, old man yelling at clouds? Yeah, that was me. I did it. And I do it again. Yeah, I can guarantee you I will do it again. But what I'm getting at is that you want the people around you to, mourn your passing or whatever, but you don't want them grieving for long periods of time. The way I looked at it is that when you think about something, somebody that passed, okay, we'll use Ozzy as the example. If you think about him long enough, you're going to start snickering. You're going to start laughing. It's good. Do you remember when Ozzy did this? You remember when Ozzy did that? That was so bizarre. Did you see when Ozzy, you know what I mean? That is what you want. And I think that is what we're seeing of a response to that. So the guy warms your heart from his dealings with people. The man understood how to do right by people for the most part, and understood lyrically how to put in, here's my fuck ups in redemption. So I think, a lot of people said, Ozzy received the Bible, inscribed to, with, his own personal Bible. And basically it's like you get a Bible and it has your name like inscribed on and it was one of the things. And one thing Ozzy said about the Bible was he couldn't understand it. And I can understand that. Like if you just pick up the Bible and start reading, what the hell are they talking about? Because you have to understand how it plays into how to read the Bible, right? Like the Bible was written in such a way. Maybe you're maybe you're an atheist or whatever. Maybe you're no, I'm Satan all the way, whatever. But the Bible was written in such a way that the most brilliant mind could interpret it, and the layman could understand it. And they said when they gave Ozzy this Bible, he opened it up and he goes, I can understand this. So was that his coming to Jesus moment? I don't know. We'll never know. I'd like to hope so. So I guess I got to wrap this video up. There's a lot that we can learn from this in a positive way. Again, as a guy who's buried enough people, family members and stuff like that, the thing you take away from it is when you grieve, you have to grieve. Okay. And I grieve. I don't deal with family deaths well, per se. But I grieve, but I don't dwell. Because, like, for example, the passing of my mom. I know my mom would kick my ass if, I didn't get over it, kind of thing. So instead, the reason why you're grieving, okay, is because that person touched you, you know, and that person left a mark on you. That's what you're grieving. You see what I mean? That's what you're grieving. That's why you cry. That's why you let all that out. You know. So what I'm taking out of that is, okay, is that a bad thing? No, the loss is bad. Yeah, I mean nobody likes loss. You know, nobody's brave when they die. Like this idea that I don't fear death, blah, blah, until your moments from it. And if you're unfortunate enough to realize that you are at your end, um, you will be scared. You will be all those things, right? But the thing is that what I think would be more scary is not leaving something positive for the next generation, spiritually, mentally, physically, whatever. Paying it forward, something for them to remember you by. Write a great song, build a castle, whatever it is. Teach people. Leave that influence on them. And that way, when they do, from time to time, people that pass that you love pop in your head, it's like, I remember when such and such did this, such and such did, so and so did that. And it puts a smile on your face. And I think that's what Ozzy can teach us out of this. So his passing is bad in the sense that nobody likes loss, but condolences to the family. But I think in years to come, Ozzy's going to transcend God knows how many generations. What a legacy. Could that not be something you'd want to strive for? You know what I mean? We might never get there, but that is a positive influence. Anyway, I'll leave it at about that. I got to go do stuff like tend to my chickens. Yep. I guess that's what I'm going to go do now. So, anyway, yeah, I figured I'd make a video about it. Not so much just about the man, but, the passing of the man and what I think it represents. And I think this is kind of locks it up pretty good. Hopefully the video won't be so big that I can't upload it, because that happens with this new phone. Anyway, there you go. Yeah, you guys tell me your stories and what you think and all that good stuff. All right, have a great day, eh?